It's the Fellowship of the Geek Show, a weekly podcast about comics, the comic book industry, and other geek pop culture. Music courtesy of Manny the Martyr. And now, on with the show! Hey there, everybody. The Fellowship of the Geeks podcast. My name is Thomas Chick, and joining me for this episode is Mike Marlowe.
Hey, gang.
Les Webster.
Hello, all.
And Liz Newman.
Hello, everybody.
How are you guys doing?
Merry New Year.
Yeah. Was that your Eddie Murphy impression right there, or?
I didn't put much effort into the accent, but yeah.
No. Okay, I just want to make sure.
That's where I got it from, but.
Yeah. Happy 2020 to everybody. I hope everybody had a great holiday season, and hopefully 2020 is a great year for us all. So, since we had a little time off, what did y'all do with your time?
That would be like recording yet another show, but anyway. Managed to stay entertained with all the crap going on. But, I have more recently started getting some prep work done for some future episodes of the show, so I'm starting to watch a few movies and read a few books to get ready for some stuff coming up. Teaser.
Teaser.
Mm-hmm. I won't talk about what exactly yet, but.
Well, that's why it's called a tease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to wait for that. We'll be talking about that soon enough. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Next.
Do you want me to go?
I don't know. Les, do you want her to go? Or do you want to jump in here real quick and go first?
Please, Liz, go right ahead.
Oh, man.
Now, just remember, he was offered the opportunity to go before Liz. Just remember this in 20 minutes. When he finally gets to talk about what he did.
Wow, 20 minutes. That's pretty...
That's optimistic, right?
Yeah.
That's only if we only had a week off. Well, I think, see, part of this I got out before the show. Me and Brandon, we did go and finally see Star Wars. And, yeah. It was okay. I'll just leave it at that. I think we've said our piece. I was watching a few of the shows to get ready for tonight's show, actually. So I think most of my talking will be during the show this time.
Ooh, that'll be an interesting change of pace.
Right. But no, we had a good Christmas, and although I did find out like 2 hours before we were supposed to do our Christmas Eve that it had turned into a dinner. So, yeah.
Hello, Domino's.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, it all works out. We're all in one piece. Had a good vacation.
Nobody
I took
got
vacation
disowned or anything?
No. Not this year. That was last year,
Okay, well, yeah, good.
But from last year, it was quieter this year.
Well, there you go. That's a win.
Right.
Of a sort.
You make everybody mad at Thanksgiving. They don't show up for Christmas,
It's a plan, I'm just saying. Whether it's a good plan or not, we leave open, but it's a plan.
One of the cool things I was so excited about for Christmas is, I work with a lot of animals and stuff. And I guess you guys have heard Tom's has it where if you buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes to, a kid who needs shoes. Well, Skechers came out with this thing called Bobs. And they basically look like Tom's. They're a little bit more, I've worn both, and the Bobs are so much more comfortable. But a proceed from buying these shoes goes to animal rescue. So it's kind of cool that people got me Bob's shoes. So not only did I get shoes, I helped animals too. So
nice. You helped
I
animals
thought
get
that was,
shoes.
yeah,
That's
I
cool.
thought that was pretty. Plus, they also do a certain proceed does still go to children in need. So just because you help animals, kids still get shoes, you know. But I thought it was kind of neat because it seems like a lot of the times our animals are forgotten about, you know, and any amount, whether it's $1, $2, $3, definitely goes a long way, especially in the rescue world. Which, without getting too down and sad, but Australia right now,
Yeah.
my God, my heart breaks. They have already lost, I think they said 500 million animals over there. And I'm not discounting the lives. There have been 8 lives lost during this, which for the mass fire that's going on, you know, any life is a loss, but that's pretty low. I mean, compared to some of these other numbers that have come out. So that I'm really thankful for the guys that are doing their jobs and keeping these people safe. I know that they're helping as many animals as they can. I think they said they're losing more koalas right now than kangaroos because kangaroos can run faster.
Right.
And then when you think about that, that's almost sad. You know?
Koalas are more flammable too.
Yeah, with all the fur. They said they've talked
Wow.
to
The fur and the oils from the eucalyptus, yeah.
Yeah.
They burn easier. I've
They
heard
said
that anyway.
Bindi Irwin, Steve Irwin's daughter,
Mhm.
their animal rescue center, they said they've already helped 90,000 animals. So it's a mess. So if, you know, don't forget your local animals, but if you have any extra, they definitely need the help over there. Definitely thoughts and prayers. I know people are like, ooh, that does so much, but when you feel helpless sometimes and you don't know what to do, you know. So
And I do want to add one thing to that. It's sad and unfortunate that I have to say this, but it needs to be said. If you do want to help out financially to help support these animals and the people who've lost everything, do your research on who you're sending the money to.
yes.
There's going to be a lot of scammers out there right now wanting to profit off this. As sad as that is,
It's sad. Yep.
that is the world we live in right now. So do your homework on who you
And
want
not
to
just the local charities. I won't get on my soapbox, but even your big charities, really pay attention to how much they're giving to this disaster. Some charities are known to hang on to a certain percentage, waiting for the next disaster, which is great, but that's not what people are giving money for. They're giving money for this disaster and for these people. So really, really, really check out your charities and what percentage is going to the actual people there and not just to their charity to pay their CEO or, you know.
Right.
or other administrative fees. Like that.
Right.
So yeah, definitely do your research if you want to help out, but by all means, please help out if you can.
Yeah.
Okay, Les, I don't think that was 20 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just waking up. We spent the vacation in Florida and just north of the Everglades. Had a fun time. It was nice, but it sure did not feel like winter.
I would think that would be the point, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah, well, but it was colder there than it was here in Dallas.
Yeah, it wasn't really all that cold here in Dallas, so.
No, but it was good. We had a fun time.
Cool.
Sweet.
Nice. Had a nice little quiet Christmas with the family. Didn't really do a whole heck else. I did. I'm going to bring around the comics. We need to eventually. I did pick up some trades, and one of these I was surprised. I don't remember even hearing about this coming out, but I was happily surprised, so I had to pick it up. This is the complete collection of Not Bran Ek. This was a parody series from the 60s, although there was one issue that was put out by Marvel within the last year, and I think it was part of the celebration of their 80th anniversary. And don't roll your eyes, Les.
I know. I read it.
But this is the entire 14 issues. And the thing that kind of surprised me when I was going through this is I knew Marie Severin did a lot of the art, but I was surprised to find out that Jack Kirby, Gene Colan, Steve Ditko, basically anybody who was at Marvel during the 60s did something with this and was basically parodying themselves, which I think is really cool. I don't know if that's something that would be done today, of creators making fun of what they're doing in the characters that they're working on, that kind of thing. So it was kind of a neat little revelation, but it's a fun book.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of on my wish list too. I hadn't gotten around to picking it up yet, but I was planning on it.
It's worth it. It's really funny, and the thing is, it's not just Marvel. There's a lot of DC characters in here as well.
Oh, I imagine so.
But then again, DC did the same thing as well. So I mean, especially since it's parody, then there's no problems. So.
Yep.
So yeah, I highly recommend it. If you need a laugh or two, there you go. Before we get into this week's discussion, I do want to mention our monthly meet and gabs. If you're new to our show, first of all, welcome. I hope you have a good time listening to the podcast. But we do a monthly gathering. If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you're more than welcome to come join us, where we basically gather, have some good food, and have some great conversation about anything that's going on in the geek universe. It's always the second Saturday of the month, and it's coming up here real soon. It's going to be January 11th, 7 p.m., and it'll be at our usual place, which is Wing City. That is located at 1456 Beltline Road in Garland, and the zip is 75044. All this information is on our website, www.thefellowshipofthegeeks.net. Just click on the events page, and there's all the information there. We also have a Facebook event set up, as usual. So if you're following us on Facebook, first of all, thank you. And second of all, just go ahead and click on the events page, and there's all the information for the gathering. And if you're interested in joining us, then by all means, please do. We'd love to see you there. We're also still taking comics for the charity Comics for Kids, which goal is to provide all ages and some teen books to kids who are in hospitals and cancer centers. So if you have new or like new comics that you'd like to donate, we'll be happy to take them. There's information on our website as well. The tab is CB4K with all the links, or you can go to cb4k.org. We definitely recommend you to go there if you'd like to donate financially, and the funds actually go to help shipping costs for comics to be delivered to hospitals across the United States and Canada. So a great little charity that we're happy to be part of, and we encourage you to help out if you can. Alrighty. Our first discussion of 2020. Can you believe it? This particular story arc or storyline is probably one of the best known and would be best loved. I don't know if it'd be best loved, but it's best known X-Men story. Probably say in the top, certainly in the top 10 best known Marvel storyline, which if you think about how many stories Marvel has done over the years, that's saying something. And it's actually celebrating its 40th anniversary. Not only, I'm trying to put it in the right words. I mean, not only been in comic form, it's been in a cartoon form at least once, and I think there's going to be a couple other versions of it as well. And the storyline has been adapted into 2 live-action movies, or at least story elements of it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One may be a little bit more closer to the source material than the other one, but I don't know if we'll get into that or not. That's fine. But it is the X-Men's Dark Phoenix saga. Sorry to say that I was not into X-Men at the time this particular story arc came out. I was actually a little bit later before I jumped on, probably by a couple of years, probably 2, maybe 3 at the most, but more likely 2. But I had heard of this. I've heard of the story, and when I finally was able to get a collection of these issues, I sat around and read it, and it was I was blown away. It was such a great story. And for those who've not read it, you need to read it. This is the story of Jean Grey, who, how do you want to say? She sacrifices herself to save her teammates, pushes her powers, and comes out of it almost another person with a power set to the nth degree,
right.
I guess.
Her powers are amplified dramatically.
Right.
Yeah. It consumes her.
And yeah. Well, I mean, there was a little help there with being kind of pushed toward the dark side, and it's kind of funny since we were kind of talking about Star Wars before pre-show. There's some similarities here, so.
Yeah.
So with that kind of set, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of step back and get your guys' thoughts about this story and your impressions.
Well, I'll go first. I've read the comics, which of course, beautiful story, and I've seen what they've tried to do with the movies, but I think a lot of this clicked to me. There's a channel I subscribe to on YouTube. It's called Nerd Sync, and he kind of walked through the whole story and kind of showed who the writers were at the time and everything else. But something I hadn't thought about when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby first did X-Men, nobody liked it. Nobody cared. I mean, it went over so well that it got canceled. So when Chris Claremont actually got a hand at this, and the guy's name is it's failing me, his co-conspirator on this.
You have Dave Cockrum as original artist, and then John Byrne.
John Byrne. Maybe it's John Byrne.
Definitely through the Dark Phoenix part of this, but it was originally started off with Dave Cockrum.
When they got a hold of X-Men, they're like, okay, of course Marvel at the time was like diversity. We've got to put it in the comic books. We got to get more. So total rewrite of X-Men, different characters and everything else, but they really liked Marvel Girl, which was Jean Grey. So they were like, well, let's make her badass, since nobody cares, nobody's reading X-Men. It really gave them the leverage to be creative with this. They were going to do some things that the other comic books right now were kind of scared to do. I mean, my God, they killed off one of their main characters. That back then. Now it's kind of like, oh yeah, he's dead. He'll be back next week. But back when this was wrote, you didn't do that. You didn't do that. So they really took this story and they were like, whatever most absurd thing we can think of, let's put them in space. Yeah, let's put them in space. So, they got away with this, though, because like I said, at the time, whenever it first launched, nobody knew who the X-Men were. I mean, they did, but what they knew of it, they didn't like it, you know. So when people finally got a hold of this story and then it started going into the Dark Phoenix line, it was just kind of like, wow, you know, we've never seen a hero turn into a villain before, you know. So that was giving the reader something different. They did link it all back to the Marvel Universe. I didn't realize it, like I said, until I'd watched the podcast on it. The same cosmic force that hit Phoenix was actually the same cosmic force that hit the Fantastic Four. So they were playing with the ideal of, okay, if it gave normal people superpowers, what would it do to a mutant who already had powers and just totally amps it up, you know? And that's what we got with Dark Phoenix. It changed her into a totally different person. Of course, there were no match whatsoever for the X-Men. They couldn't control her. The editor at the time, Jim Shooter?
I believe so.
The final ending of this was supposed to be that Jean Grey was going to get stripped of all of her powers and she could go back to the mansion and stay with her friends and everything else. Well, Jim Shooter came in and he was like, what? She killed a planet, a civilized planet without, you know, a thought. You know, she killed everyone, and now you're just going to let her sit at the same table with Wolverine and Storm? Is Storm going to sit at the same table with her, you know, after all this has happened and everything else? Can they really look her in the eye and be like, yeah, you killed thousands of people, you know?
Yeah, the version of this story I heard did use the word genocide.
Yeah,
so,
genocide. Yeah. Yep. So he was very unhappy, and he was like, no, you make this work because, you know, I've given you leniency and you've done all these crazy things, but your fans will eat you alive if you do that, you know. Well, they had liked Jean Grey so much, they didn't really want to kill her, but that's the only option they had. They were like, okay, you know, we're going to kill her. And Jim Shooter was like, great, do it, get it done. So they didn't think he would go for that because, like I'd said, you didn't kill off your main characters like that, you know. So I think the ending that they finally gave her, where she realized this was too much for her and she shouldn't be a god. I think she said that over and over and over again. I can't be a god, you know. Sacrificed herself to save her team, but I think she also not only saved them, but she saved herself because, you know, with absolute power comes absolute corruption, and you know, she would have been okay for a while had she been able to contain that. But after a while, you know, I think in the final setting where they show her, she gets back into her Marvel Gold costume because when they rebirthed her and made her Phoenix and everything else, new costume and everything else. Well, during this fight, you see the costume change from, you know, the Marvel one to the Phoenix one, and then to the Dark Phoenix one, to where it showed you even then, when she was trying to do good with it, it was just too much for her to control. So at the end, she sacrificed her life to save, you know, herself and her friends. So beautiful story. I think when Marvel finds themselves circling the drains, like with their movies, that's when they go back to this, because I actually think this was a core story for the X-Men. It really put them on their feet and made them the team that we love today. And, you know, this story really helped shape that world for them and kind of showed what they could do, and, you know, even what they could do when it was a friend, you know. So, very good story. I guess I think they do finally have it collected in trade, but you have to be careful when you buy the trades of this story because it's broken down into 3 arcs. There's 3 books, or they have the main, I don't think they're calling it a compendium, but it's what I would call a compendium, where the whole story is collected. So you can get it a few different ways, but if you have not read it and you're an X-Men fan, you definitely need to read this one. It really makes you understand Jean Grey more. And I think they put a lot into her, you know, especially for this story. That he had also mentioned, which I thought was kind of interesting, that when they wanted Phoenix, they were like, you know, we want her to be able to fight Thor and to, you know, I forget who the other guy was. Well, Jim Shooter was like, oh, she's a girl. She can't do that, you know. So they came up with the Fire Lord, which had gone toe-to-toe with Thor and came to a standstill, you know. And I forget the other character they wanted her to fight, and they said no, but this guy had already fought them and stuff too. So when he came onto the scene and she beat him, you know, like it was a piece of cake, it still kind of gave them that story that they wanted where she could fight with Thor and, you know. So I thought that was kind of cool. Still made a girl powerful, just he didn't realize it.
Yeah, they had to be subtle about it.
Right. But then at the end, he actually saved the story, which is what surprised me, you know. I've heard some pretty bad rumors about him. You know? So for him to actually be like, hey, no, you can't do that. Your fans won't let you do that. And I kind of have to agree with them. I think had they ended that story any other way, the fans kind of would have been like, what? You can't do that. These are comic books, but, you know, these aren't the funny pages.
Well, and I think part of what, I mean, feeding off of what you're talking about, part of why this story made the X-Men a thing in the late 70s, early 80s, basically the second incarnation of the X-Men, was that, I mean, say what you will about Stan Lee, I mean, he did a lot of amazing things as a writer of comic books.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I hesitate, I almost hate to say this because I might get shouted down for it, but his stories were not necessarily, and they didn't necessarily need to be, but they weren't all that deep or complex. This was a very complicated story with the Phoenix, the whole Phoenix saga, all the way from the beginning to end. I mean, Claremont was a different kind of writer. I mean, he came into it as a writer, and I mean, he'd kind of come up through the ranks at Marvel, but they handed this to him, and he did it, and he was a much more sophisticated writer than Stan ever was. And so the deal here is that this is not, I mean, this isn't like a comic book story like you would think of if you're reading comics in the mid-70s. It's just not. This is darker and more sophisticated and more grown up in all reality. And I think that's a lot of what made, I mean, because the X-Men, they were supposed to be, for the most part, younger characters, younger heroes. But these are grown-ups. These started being grown-up stories at this point, and I think that makes a huge difference in your readership. Because honestly, I mean, a lot of your fans, I mean, some of them have been around a while, and with a story like this, you're appealing to an older audience, and so it's not just teenagers anymore. And I think this is part of the shift, I don't know if this was the cause or the effect of that shift into comics for grown-ups, but I think it's an important point in that history.
Yeah.
I say that, and I didn't actually get my hands on this story until several years later. And it was part of how I got introduced to the X-Men, and I'm pretty sure it's part of why I became a fan at the time.
See, I started X-Men after this story, but this was definitely one that they had mentioned and talked about, so it was kind of one of those, you need to go find it so you know what they're talking about. You know.
Very much so. Same
here.
Very much so.
But yeah, she was definitely one of them that, I don't want to get sexist here, but during the time when I started reading comic books, we didn't have a lot of the females that were real that could stand toe to toe with Batman. Yeah, we had Wonder Woman and that kind of stuff, but I think with these, with Storm and Jean Grey and Rogue and all of them, it was it wasn't the prim and proper, it was a gritty and it was dirty and, not dirty like X-rated, but it wasn't the clean story that you're used to getting from your lead females, so it kind of
real.
It was.
I mean, Wonder Woman's great because Wonder Woman is this amazingly powerful person who kind of downplays it a little bit, and honestly has done so to varying levels for her whole career. Most of the time, she's pretending to be something. She's choosing to be the secretary for the Justice League or whatever,
right?
Instead of being one of the frontline people, even though she's quite possibly more powerful than any of them. The ladies of the X-Men didn't really. I mean, especially once you get into this era, they don't really hold back like that.
No.
I mean, they're out there fighting with the boys just like everybody else.
Well, growing up, I always looked at Wonder Woman as she was perfect. She always made the right decision. She always did the good things. She always, was prim and proper and always looked well put together. And, with the X-Men ladies, they weren't perfect. That was the whole foundation of the X-Men was they weren't perfect. They were still learning. They were still, they knew they had problems that they had to work on. And sometimes, with a reader, it's good to, well, I'm not perfect either, but I can still do the right thing, So it kind of connected more with me that they weren't perfect, You didn't have to be perfect.
Right, which is what makes them feel more like real people.
Mm-hmm.
Is, they screw up and then they deal with the consequences of that screw up, and that's just like real life. That's what normal people do. They just they just can't necessarily bench press a cement truck to doing it.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same stuff on a different scale, but it's the same stuff, and people, young readers especially, can see that and they can relate to that.
Yep.
And so I think this was a big step. This storyline in and of itself was a big step toward kind of making the X-Men popular because of that, because of the kind of the sense of reality there, unlike the total fantasy of, again, Wonder Woman. And I actually lump Superman into that too, so that we're not being totally sexist. Superman is that kind of all-American, all-powerful boy, and it's one of those deals where if you're not real careful, it's really hard to craft a good, relatable story about a character like that.
It is.
This is actually, it's a total sidetrack. This is one of the problems that the writers of Star Trek: The Next Generation had, because Gene Roddenberry's vision was, okay, the whole deal here is that this is supposed to be a nearly perfect society. Well, it's kind of hard to build a story in that. I mean, if nothing really bad ever happens, where's your conflict? Where's your story?
Yeah.
And the comics was kind of that way by the late 70s too. It was like, okay, these are how do we make these perfect characters interesting? Well, the answer, obviously, at the time was to create new characters that aren't perfect.
Yeah.
And make stories that every teenager can relate to from that.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, you had every single hero in the X-Men universe was no fight for her. And so it showed that sometimes even the good guys lose. You're not always going to come out on top. And, had she not have sacrificed herself, they would have died, if not from her, but, from I forget, whatever they were, Scalids, whatever planet they were on. But, it goes back to the not perfect, that the good guys, sometimes you're going to get your ass handed to you. It's how you pick yourself up and go forward that makes you the hero, Mm-hmm. So I think there was a lot of things that they pulled out because, like I said, they were like, well, nobody cares. We can do this. Yeah, let's
Right.
make Wolverine get his butt kicked by a girl.
The deal there is that, yeah, we have to do something different because the last thing we didn't sell books. So what are we
Yep.
going to do different to sell some books this time? All right, well, let's push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. And I think they said this was even responsible for Marvel realizing like the special events, like Secret Wars spawned off from this, the Spider-Man thing spawned off from this, and I mean it not only affected the X-Men but several other things that showed them, hey, we can do a special event in our comic books and people will read it. It's special. Before they played the special card out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and before that, I mean, we saw this in some of the Avengers stuff we've read before and other books. Some of those older books, you didn't have extended storylines. It was one and done.
Yep.
I mean, at most two and done. Yeah, to do something like this that lasts, I don't know, what, 9 or 10 issues is just the Dark Phoenix part of this. Yeah, that was a rarity even at that point. Even in 1980 when this came out, people weren't doing, comic book companies weren't doing that much.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, I mean, again, pushing the envelope a little bit. Give people a reason to come back by not finishing the story in one issue. There's a thought. Let's look back all the way to the 19th century and see how some books were published, like Dickens, for example. Most of his stuff was published in serial form. You got a chapter a week or a chapter a month.
Yeah.
Well, hell, nowadays that seems perfectly normal for comics, but 40 years ago that wasn't.
It wasn't.
That wasn't how they did it.
Well, I think it also went back to how people were getting their comics. I think all of us had talked about, going into the drugstore and you got what they had,
Mm-hmm. They weren't stocking. They didn't always have X-Men. They didn't always have Justice League. They didn't always have Superman.
No.
They had what
Which
they got.
sucked. If at the time it was a continuing story, well, you get what you get, and you want to read the whole story, and
right, you got to go to a whole list of stores of whatever type that have spinner racks,
right,
to see if you can find the specific one you're looking for.
Which was few and far in between. And of course, there was no internet. You couldn't hunt down your holes.
Well, either that or you got the mail subscription.
Yeah.
I did that. Wes, did you?
No, I didn't. I'd always toyed with the idea, but I didn't take the step.
So, once a month, that issue shows up in the mailbox. It's usually kind of folded.
Right. It was never in very good condition.
It was never in good
class mail, but yeah.
Right. But you got it. So you weren't going to miss. Hopefully, you wouldn't miss an issue. You don't know nowadays with the Postal Service, but that's not even being off.
That was just as true 40 years ago as it is now.
Right.
But yeah.
Now, my comic books were leftover allowance and lunch money, so I never knew how much I had that month for comic books. I had a candy bar at lunch. Oops, there goes Batman.
Makes you think real hard about that candy bar, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, yep.
And you're right about how this changed the series in particular, because this, as y'all correctly pointed out, this was a book that had been canceled 2-3 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But for some strange reason, they were turning around doing reprints of the older material, so the book was still going, but there was no new material until Cockrum and Claremont took over. But with this story, and 2 issues later, you have Days of Future Past, all of a sudden it's right up there as one of the best-selling books. I mean, it literally took, I don't want to say overnight, but it pretty much was. It went from a book that was, no one was paying attention to everyone was paying attention to, and people were wanting to see what the next X-Men book would be. And I do want to point out, you talk about Shooter, shooting down the ending of the story arc. I had heard about that too. From what I had gathered, was the hope was that with Dark Phoenix they would turn it into basically somewhat of a, if I understood correctly, more of a reoccurring cosmic villain,
like
so,
Doctor Doom.
Yeah,
but they couldn't use Doctor Doom, so he wanted to make her the X-Men's Doctor Doom.
So yeah, just every once in a while she'll just show up and just want to do whatever, and I'm not sure how that would have worked, because I mean, and I guess at that point, I guess it could have worked, but until the whole destroying the planet, and then that was like, okay, well that's a step too far. That's something you cannot do. We got
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
Well, see, I kind of see leaving her bad was kind of like what they were toying with the ending. If we leave her locked up, they will never stop until they rescue her.
Right.
And I think that would be the same way if she would have turned into a reoccurring villain. They never would have stopped until they saved their friend. So it was kind of like, you're going to go round and round in circles, and, you can't ever let either one of them win. So, and I think also that Claremont was kind of, he loved this character, and he didn't want to see her like that. It was like, that's not what we reinvented her and rebirthed her for, was to be Doctor Doom. So
right,
that's
to be the villain of the villain of the week. That's not cool. We made her, we put her on too big a scale for that.
Yep.
And yeah, and that story would have been a very different one. The story to make her the recurring bad guy. It seems funny.
Kind of like the Joker and Batman, how he tortures himself because he feels responsible for that. I think the X-Men would have done the same thing. She was fine until she took on all the radiation to land the air shuttle that they couldn't, So they are part to blame because they allowed her to do that.
And apparently they had decided they didn't want to use Magneto anymore, I guess. I don't know. Because they really kind of already had that role filled.
Right.
Maybe they wanted another one, but still.
Well, I mean, you can only use him so many times until all of a sudden, kind of out, you don't want to use him too much.
If nothing else, he'll stop showing up because he'll get tired of getting his ass kicked.
Right. And it's the same thing. How many times can you kick someone's ass a different way?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, to me, that's a weird concept for a character like that. But that's also, I'm biased by having read this Dark Phoenix saga. So to have seen that story differently, it would be hard to relate to that now, since I've already seen the story as it is.
Right.
I have the bias.
I think they handled it very, I hate to say beautiful, but it was a beautiful story, You could tell that the love and the respect they had for a character that they, remade. And so it was kind of nice that they didn't want to see her go through that,
Yeah, regardless of how they got to where they got, they handled it very well.
Yep.
For sure.
And I don't correct me if I'm wrong, if we didn't cover this. You talked about how Shooter talked about changing the ending. They had already had those pages done for that issue.
Yeah, they had to redo the last 5 pages
so they
or
had,
something like that.
Yeah, they actually had to go back. Some of those pages had to be done from scratch, and then some of it was just changing some of the dialogue to just try to fix it to where it goes to the new ending of, of her sacrificing herself. So, and those pages have come up again.
Yeah,
there
they
was
published them. I mean, it was several years later, but it's been a while now since they published them.
Yeah. I think in one of the traits they have out, they have the extra ending in there, or the alternate ending in there.
I'm sure they do.
Les, your thoughts?
I was an early reader of X-Men. This was after a time that I took a sabbatical, so I really wasn't aware of much around it. I did read it, and I find it quite unique. At one time, and I believe this, but it was referred to, Marvel was referred to putting out comics with teenagers having angst.
Like that was a bad thing.
And that really was how it looked. Peter Parker was that way. Johnny Storm was that way. Several of the characters fit that mold.
Mm-hmm.
The early X-Men had that. This was a turning point for them. And I think it was strong. It was a good, solid story to reinvent the X-Men, because we knew how they were fighting with the Blob and the other villains that were already established. You know, Magneto and
the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
The Brotherhood, yes, and we knew how that was going to be handled, but this took it a different direction, and I commend them for it. In this, we were introduced to how many new characters?
Right.
Like 6.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought for Claremont to actually open up and say, let's try this, I thought it was a brave move. And it was a story. I'm sorry that it was brought up kind of earlier that Stan Lee could not have done this.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have the drive to put his heroes into such a predicament.
He wasn't that dark.
Right.
Yes. But I think that it was a solid story. I had a couple of questions about it, but I can get past it and really take a look now and say, congratulations for resetting the boundaries. The envelope just became much larger. And as a result, it affected not only the Marvel titles, but other publishers.
Yeah.
The more realistic look or thought process for the plot became very different.
Well, they set a bar.
Yes, they did.
They sure did.
Did you want to talk about the movies versions, Liz?
I don't think they've done one good so far. I hate to say it, but I think where they failed in the movies is because they did it so well in the comic book. I forget who the artist was on this, but just part of the story that made it drew you in was, the psychedelic colors when she's going through the radiation and stuff. And it was just the whole thing on a whole. For me, it was perfect. So when you try to tap off into the movies with it, it just kind of fell flat. And they've tried this, twice now?
In the feature films, yes, they've tried it
yes.
twice. The first one, they changed the story to an almost disturbing degree.
Yeah.
And I have not seen. I mean, honestly, the more recent one just came out last year, so I have not seen it.
June.
Yeah.
I did not hear good things about it in general.
It was better than the other one. But even that, it just, no.
As long as it didn't make Wolverine the star, it's going to be better than the other one, because that's, honestly, for me, that was the big failing, is like, why are we telling this from Wolverine's point of view?
Right.
Wolverine was barely there.
It was Jean and Scott's story.
Right.
Yeah.
And somehow we managed to twist it into its Wolverine story, and
because
Jean is just a big threat.
Because Wolverine is
what, is the moneymaker.
It's the cash cow. Yep.
Admittedly, they're doing that 25 years or 30 years after the fact. So, yeah, I mean, by then Wolverine is the star.
But see, once again, when the movies start circling the drain and people are getting uninterested, boom, Dark Phoenix Saga. Then they branch off and they start doing it again, and then once again, when the movies drop off and it's circling the drain, boom, here we go, Dark Phoenix movies. So it's like they know this story is the core, and they keep trying to go back to that and capture that feeling that they got when this was launched, and you're not going to get that. I mean, we know the story, and even if you told it word for word, pain by pain, we've heard the story. It's not going to impact us the same way as it did the first time, Now it's kind of like, oh, we've been there, done that. What you got?
Well, and the flip side of that is, if you start off with that, if you go out, okay, we're going to reboot the X-Men franchise, we're going to start off with Dark Phoenix, and we're going to do everything right and perfect the first time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you top that with the sequel?
Right. Yep.
If you get it right, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah,
because
that was your swan song.
If you screw it up, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So you're kind of doomed. That's why I think they try to stay away from it for a long time, is because you can't win.
Well, anytime you bring a character back, you're going to have a lot of questions. It's kind of what killed Green Arrow. You bring someone back, you have a lot of questions you have to answer. How? Why? Who? What the fuck? So I think it would be hard to follow up this story, because now, she's done her swan song or Phoenix song, and you have to bring her back. And that is hard to portray on a screen unless they do somehow the Phoenix survive.
Okay, but here's the deal. If there's any consolation to that idea, she is called the Phoenix. I mean, that's what Phoenixes do.
Yeah, that's what they do.
They come back to life. I mean, that's their thing. If anybody's going to get away with it, if it's going to make sense anywhere, it would be Phoenix. But they didn't actually write the story to do that, so it still looks awkward.
Yeah. And I think I stated before, too, with books and comic books, for me it's kind of hard to watch a movie after you've read it, because you've already painted the picture in your mind. Your mind has already assigned a voice to each character when you read it and everything else. And then when you see it on film, it's kind of like, whoa.
It's not going to match what you had in mind, right?
Right. And it's not as good. I mean, nobody can do a film as good as I can imagine, Or you can imagine.
Okay, well, there you go. Maybe we just need Liz to direct this movie. That's the deal. She'll do it perfectly the first time. Right.
But you know what I'm saying. In your mind, it's perfect, Now, my dream may be different from yours, but, it's just nobody can do it better than you think the way,
it's never going to have the same impact.
Yep.
To maybe put a slightly less egotistical spin on it. It's never going to feel the same as the first time you experienced it. So if you've already experienced the story's it's going to be different. And,
it is.
And it's not always going to reflect well in your eyes.
No. Which is part of the reason that I don't watch Stephen King movies.
Only part?
Yeah, only part. But
there's an argument to be made that there haven't really been that many good ones, but anyway.
Yeah.
There have been a few, but not many.
there's so many things that they change, you know, from the book. And I understand a lot of that is done for time and money. But when you take key elements from a book or a comic book and totally change, you know, perfect example in Needful Things. In the book, it's a puppy, you know, a cute, sweet, innocent little puppy. In the movie, it's a big, foaming at the mouth Rottweiler. Well, of course you want the dog dead, but in the book, it's like, how could you do that to a sweet, innocent little puppy? So for me, it changed the whole thought and the feeling that you had associated with what was happening there, because they've changed the main element, you know, the main make you cry and pull your heartstrings. They've changed it. So it doesn't come off the same way as it did in the book, you know.
Right. You're not building the character the same way. And yes,
Right.
I'm talking about the character of the dog.
Mm-hmm.
It's different.
And it makes a different impact.
Yes, it does.
You know. So, and I think, and that's the main thing that the Dark Phoenix has failed at the movies, is they've changed things that were important, and no matter how minor they think they were to the story, it's important, you know. So either do it right or don't do it.
Well, and given that this is now a 40-year-old story, I mean, I think an argument can be made that they would never be able to do it right at this point anyway, because there's going to be some elements of it of varying levels of importance that are simply products of the time. And you can't change that, even though that particular franchise did make at least some effort to do some period type stuff. I mean, they tried to make it seem like they were in the 60s, and they sort of then started with the sequels shifting themselves forward through time. Like the next one was set in the 70s, and then the next one was set in the 80s, and then how well that worked, I have no idea. I lost interest real fast in that franchise, but even that is still really artificial. And so your level of success at that is going to vary widely.
Well, I'm kind of curious where they're going to take the X-Men now that Marvel's getting back under one house, you know.
If they're smart, they'll leave it alone for 10 years. Then again, I think I've said that before about other things.
Yeah. And, you know, I hadn't thought about it until you had brought it up, but I think you're absolutely right on that. They need to wait a little while, because like now, you're going to have a very, very hard time filling Hugh Jackman's shoes. When people see Hugh Jackman out on the street, they don't see Hugh, they see Wolverine. You know, he played the part so well.
Right. And
that's what he's known for. So it's going to be very hard to find someone that you can get to come in and play that your fans aren't going to petition and riot and everything else because you put them there. You know?
You say that, but honestly, 40 years wasn't long enough for Star Wars. So,
yeah.
I mean, people are still having a cow about the most recent movies. I mean, all three of them, not even just the latest one. The whole series. There's been a lot of childhoods ruined. I'm just saying. Even though that's the most meaningless statement I've ever heard.
If a movie can ruin your childhood,
there's something.
It's not childhood.
It ain't the movie. That's the problem here. That's the deal.
Right.
The movie's not the problem.
But, you know, there's been some articles where they're like, oh, it's the fans. To a certain degree, I'll give them that. But don't blame sloppy writing and no continuity through any of your three movies on the fans. We had nothing to do with that. You know, that was your writers, your directors, your big mouse ears that did that.
That's what happens when you hand something like that off to a fan.
Yeah.
And J.J. Abrams, and I'm going to pick on him a little, has never made any bones in anything else he's done. He has never tried to deceive anybody about the fact that he is a huge Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
I mean, for crying out loud, he took over the Star Trek franchise because he was such a big Star Wars fan. And he did his best to Star Warsify the Star Trek franchise. And a lot of people hate him for it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, so
in
his defense, he's a fan. I mean, so him being a fan is both a blessing and a curse, because you know, he's going to do his best to keep that level of reverence for the material, but you also have the downside is that his level of reverence for the material is not really going to match anybody else's. It's going to be his reverence for it. It's not going to be my reverence for it. It's not going to be your reverence for it. It's going to be his reverence. And so what he's doing is not necessarily going to be what everybody loves and wants to see.
Right.
That's the downside to
Just like we were talking about books being different in my head than it would be in your head, and
yeah, they were
that's what
very
happened.
different in J.J. Abrams' head.
Yeah, very different.
Very different. Yes.
But I'm going to be mean for a minute, okay? It kind of surprises me.
A minute?
All right, why stop now? Shit.
No, I'm just acknowledging I know I'm being mean. I'm kind of surprised he's a fan. I mean, I know that a lot of the things were, and see, some of the things that people are griping about with the Star Wars movie is things that Disney told them, hey, you have to do this. You know, the whole kiss thing, you have to put this in here. You have to, and it pissed J.J. Abrams off because he was like, that's not what I wanted in my film. So it's kind of like.
Well, and he can't make a movie in a vacuum either. He can't just do it all himself. That's just not
Right.
realistic. Movies don't work that way anymore. But yeah, I mean.
But to a certain point, especially with this last one, I think he let the fans get in his head. And there were some things that were changed and some things that he even did because he thought that the fans wanted it that way.
Then he was
And
wrong.
he should have stuck with his gut. You knew it was weird, and you were changing what you wanted to do because that's what your fans wanted. Well, now I'm kind of curious about the way he wanted to do it.
I'm not even going to make the joke.
I'm going to demand the Abrams cut. But you know what I'm saying? If you have an ideal and it's good and you're a fan and you're sure of your source, then why change it because a couple of fans got in your head,
And on the other side of that, I mean, as far as his particular fandom is concerned, he was a fan of something 40 years ago.
Yeah.
He has changed in 40 years. His interpretation of the material has changed over 40 years. So what he was a fan of then is totally different now. I mean, that in and of itself has shifted in his head somehow. And I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. That's irrelevant. I'm just saying it's different now than it was. What he was a fan of originally has changed. I mean, there are entire, you could take entire courses on this in college, on how texts change over time and how interpretations change over time. And I mean, we could go into Marshall McLuhan if we wanted to, but I'm going to spare everybody because, to be honest, I don't really remember all that much of it. But yeah, I mean, the people simply read books differently now than they did, and I mentioned how Dark Phoenix was kind of a product of its time, and things don't translate real well. That's kind of what I was talking about, is that the way it was received then is different now because it was received then. And so telling the same story now works very differently because, and whether Abrams was trying to tell the same story or not, he's trying to tell a similar story in the same world. And so it's kind of the same effect. It's just he's not going to be able to tell the same type of story because that type of story is old now.
Right. Yeah. I can totally see that.
And so he's as much a victim of his own fandom as anything else.
It's not just that the story's different now. It's the times that we live in are different now.
Mm-hmm. Things and that just adds another level of complication to it, too.
Aren't. Yeah, for sure. You have to make sure everything's kosher and.
And there are too many variables there to keep track, and so that's why it doesn't work very well. It's because nobody can honestly keep up with all of the crap you have to keep up with to translate a story from that time frame to this time frame. You have to understand the time better than anybody ever could in both time frames.
Kind of like over the holidays. We had, the family together and everything else, and everybody gets to telling stories about when you were younger. And there was a couple of times people were like, "What? It didn't happen that
Yeah,
way."
that's not how I remember it. Right.
Yeah, this happened and this happened, and you beat the hell out of your sister. Yes. It was kind of like, wow, all these years I saw that different.
hmm
You
And
know,
yeah, and that's kind of the same deal. That's kind of Abrams' vision of Star Wars versus your vision of Star Wars. It's exactly the same thing.
well, even going back and watching the original Star Wars now, it was different for me. But, for when I'm not 5 and in a car at a drive-in, but that I hadn't noticed before because maybe I wasn't grown up enough to catch on to that part
Right.
of it,
You didn't
or
have the experiences that you needed to recognize some of the things that are going on. Right.
exactly. Yep.
Yep. Same deal.
Why I don't like the Dark Phoenix movies is because I'm remembering the story different than trying to tell me it was.
Right. Then the directors. Yeah. Then the director then trying to translate it to now. Yeah. Exactly.
So it'd be hard. But I don't think they've done this story successfully yet. But if you do want to watch the movie, you can rent it. It has not hit HBO or Showtime or any of Netflix or anything yet, and I think Amazon Prime's got it for $5.
Sounds about like that. Yeah.
Or you can buy the trade, which is like 100 times better. Costs a little bit more, but it's yours forever.
Right. You're not just renting it. You're owning it. Well, honestly, I mean, if we want to get into renting things, something people don't think about when they're looking into comics, public libraries, they have comics. And if your specific public library doesn't have what you're looking for, there's this cool thing called interlibrary loan, where all of the libraries, or a large percentage of the libraries in the country, talk to each other and send each other stuff when they need it.
Yep. I know our local library has all of the Walking Dead trades.
There you go.
I send a lot of my friends to go get those. I don't like to loan my stuff out, but you can get it at the library.
Yep, it is a really good
check
story.
with how old this is. I didn't check to see if it was on the archive or not, though.
Neither did I.
Probably not. Probably Stan Lee and Kirby's would be on there, but I don't think this one would. Because 80s, no.
It might be worth checking into sometime.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any final thoughts before we take a quick break?
It's a great story.
Yes.
Yep.
Go check it out.
Yeah, take it in.
It is. Like I said, if you're an X-Men fan, this is definitely the core of the beginning of the X-Men we know.
Yep. If you consider yourself an X-Men fan and you haven't read the Dark Phoenix saga, you really should.
Shame on you.
A lot of people will not consider you a fan. I'm not saying you're not a fan, because that ain't me. That ain't for me to judge. But a lot of people will say you're not a fan unless you've read this.
Yep.
And I think Disney Plus has, it's been awesome. They have the original X-Men cartoon on there.
Ooh.
And I think the cartoon actually tackled this story and did a pretty good job of it. So that's also on Disney Plus right now, too.
So there you go.
Cool.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a quick break and come back with our weekly picks. And we're back, and it's time for a weekly pick. And leading off is Mike.
Okie dokie. So my first pick this week is a trade from Image Comics, and I am picking the new Lazarus trade. This is Volume 6, and it is called Fracture 1. This is basically since they started doing the 80-page ones, this is the first 3 of those combined. And this all starts, this part of the story starts like 2 years after Forever was betrayed. And so there's been some shakeups in the family and a lot of really fun, interesting stuff going on if you've read any of Lazarus before. And I've been a big fan of this book from the beginning, so I am definitely saying check this out.
Cool.
Nice.
I like the sound of it.
Alrighty, I am next, and for my first pick, I don't think I've ever done this before, but I enjoyed this story, and it's kind of cool that it's something that's been kind of trending the last year or so. It is a facsimile edition, and the one that I'm talking about is from the DC Comics. It's Detective Comics 359. And if you're not aware of what these are, it's literally a reprint of the entire comic book, including the original ads and everything, just basically a modern copy of that issue with a modern price. But Detective Comics 359 is actually the first appearance of the Barbara Gordon Batgirl. And of course, the title of that story is The $1 Million Debut of Batgirl. I love this story. This is back during the time where Carmen Infantino was doing Batman, and he's obviously doing the art on this one, and with Gardner Fox doing the writing. It's a fun story. So I'm not sure exactly why this time they're putting out a facsimile edition of this book, but I'm glad. It'd be kind of cool to go back and not only read the story again, but look at the original ads and just kind of see and just kind of relive how that book came out several years, late 60s, so just before she showed up on the TV show. So it was kind of timing around the same time.
Cool. Interesting way to slice your nostalgia, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy that DC includes the ads, something they do not do in their collections, because they'll come down for a half page and it'll be blank at the bottom, but that's where the ads used to be, and that was the way to really know what was coming up.
Oh yeah. Marvel's been doing the facsimile edition for a while too, and it's kind of cool to see these.
Neat.
Yeah.
That is neat.
Alrighty, Les.
First, I want to say DC is also putting out 80-page comics for $5.
Wow.
And those are really good because they'll have one, maybe two original stories plus reprints of old stories. So it's a good investment. It's something to give to the kids, and they get hours of reading from $5.
There you go.
Cool.
Not bad. Yep.
My first choice comes from Ablaze Comics. This is Kids #1. This is spelled KIDZ. And according to their write-up, the kids are foul-mouthed, raising hell, and doing battle with the living dead.
Woohoo!
I'm in.
All right.
I don't have to go any further than that. This just looks like kind of like a Spielberg story. It's just got a feel that I'm going to jump in on this one and give this a try, because it's going to be their tag is that Kids of Stranger Things meets Welcome to Zombieland on a Gorillaz soundtrack. So yeah, I'm going to try this.
That does sound good.
Cool, yeah.
I'm always a sucker for a good zombie story, though.
No comment.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone, too.
Coral.
Coral.
All right, Liz, you're up next.
All right, for my first pick, I am going with a Marvel comic. It's Jessica Jones Blind Spot #1. This one's kind of interesting. I think they're going to give a little bit of Jessica Jones' backstory, which I think she was with the Avengers for a while as Jewel, and then she got kidnapped by the Purple Man, and he brainwashed her and everything else. Well, this picks up after that. Luke Cage, if you guys have watched the Netflix series, they kind of totally screwed their relationship up. That's not the way it happened in the comics. So this one, they're actually still together. They still have their daughter, Danielle, and she's kind of giving her private eye business another go of it. One of her clients winds up dead, and now she's the main suspect, and she's got to clear herself of this. So it's kind of cool that they're going back to the old Jessica Jones instead of the one that they gave us from Netflix, which I can understand. You know, you want to follow what's hot, but this is what made me want to watch the Netflix series. So this is our original Jessica Jones. Definitely should be a good story. I always thought her and Luke Cage together were a great pair. So should be good.
Cool.
Sounds cool.
Yep.
Alrighty, Mike.
Okay, I'm up next, and my second pick is from Dark Horse Comics, and this is timed kind of interestingly, but I don't care. I'm picking it anyway. I am picking the Hellboy Winter Special, 2019. I would like to think this was supposed to come out a month or two ago, but hey, that's all right. It's out. It's coming out. We're good.
Yeah.
This will include 3 short stories in one issue. I am not sure. This doesn't say how big the issue is. It may be oversized. It might not. Who knows? But we should get some interesting holiday-based Hellboy stories, which, I mean, honestly, given the occult nature of some of the stuff Hellboy does, this ought to be interesting.
It should.
So, yeah, and if you haven't quite gotten enough, I mean, this is, like I said, this is probably not going to involve Christmas directly, but if you need a little bit of a holiday fix to keep you going after the fact, here you go.
Nice.
Good choice.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, I'm up again, and for my second choice, I am going with The Incredible Hulk by Peter David Omnibus Volume 1. I can't recommend this highly enough. This was such a great run of stories by Peter David. This really shook up the Hulk. And there's art from Todd McFarlane, Hurley McFarlane in here as well. This actually collects issues 328 and then 331 through 368. And then a couple issues of Web Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and then some other material. But this actually leads up to the creation of Joe Fixit, where Hulk gets kind of depowered and turns gray and a little bit smaller, but it's able to talk and basically become, if you're not familiar, Joe Fixit basically became kind of a hood bouncer in Las Vegas. So imagine a gray Hulk in a business suit and all that, and threatening to break your legs or that kind of thing. So
Is it a black suit?
A black suit?
The McFarlane thing.
Oh, okay. Don't. No. Anyway.
I liked it.
Don't patronize me, damn it.
So, such an incredible run of stories, and here's your chance to get a big chunk of them in one fell swoop. I love Peter David's writing, and some of this stuff was so great. It would be nice to actually go back and read it again.
Very cool.
Peter David's always been good.
Yep. Okay. let's see. I believe Les, you're next.
Okay. I've got a graphic novel here from Quirk Books called Comic Quest: The Buried City. This is for all ages. This is one of a series of interactive pick your panel graphic novels for middle grade readers. The idea to me is fascinating. I know there are books that have been done like this, but this one to step up and you go through the story and you're trying to become a full-fledged knight. So I'm in on this just because it's something that reaches out to younger readers, and I want to see this succeed. I'm curious, I may have to go online to see if there are other Comic Quest books, but this may be my starting point right here.
I've always liked the choose your own adventure stuff.
Yeah, see, I kind of grew up on that stuff, so
Me too.
the idea that somebody's finally doing that in comic book form, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm intrigued on how that works, so.
Yeah,
Definitely. Okay. Liz, I believe you're next.
All right, for my second pick, it's another Marvel comic, and I'm really, really excited about this one. We're reaching way back here, and this one is Oz, the complete collection of the Wonderful Wizard and the Marvelous Land. This is Scotty Young doing his take on Oz. I mean, oh my God. This was before I Hate Fairyland, but it's still the real cute little Scotty Young characters. But they do an adaptation of L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz. And in this one, we meet a little boy named Tip and his newly created magic companion, Jack Pumpkinhead. This will actually, it's the first time ever they're collecting the Wonderful Wizard of Oz 1 through 8 and the Marvelous Land of Oz 1 through 8. So 16 issues there, plus you get the Wonderful Wizard of Oz sketchbook at the end of this. Now, most trades are usually about $20, right? Now you've got 16 issues and a sketchbook for $16. And it's Scotty Young doing his interpretation of Oz. You can't beat it. I mean, you have to go get this one. Like I said, this was back from, I think the first one was done in 2008, and then the Marvelous Land was done in 2009. So this is the first time they've actually collected it and put both story arcs together. And like I said, very cute. I mean, anyone who's familiar with Scotty's work knows it's precious. It is all ages, so not quite as twisted as Fairyland was, but it's Oz, so it's still pretty twisted.
Yeah, it has its moments, you know.
Right.
This is awesome.
Cool.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was impressed that Eric Schanauer was writing this because he's been known for some great stories for fantasy.
So this was one I didn't get the full runs of, but I have pieces, which drove me crazy. But it was really cute, and I think it was probably the first thing that really caught my attention with Scotty.
Neat.
All right, and our honorable mention is...
Okay, our honorable mention, speaking of fantasy fiction, is from IDW, and this week we're picking Dungeons & Dragons: A Darkened Wish #4. This is actually a really good Dungeons & Dragons series of comics. They've been, I mean, and this is not one that this is going to sound weird. This is not one that Jim Zub is writing, so that they're keeping up the quality with other writers and artists is awesome. If there is a downside to this series, it is that This is only issue 4, and I seem to recall picking issue 1 as one of my picks, and that would have been like last spring. So it hasn't been quick to come out. There have been delays for whatever reason. I've not really looked into why. But again, it's a really cool story. If this is a totally different set of heroes, it's in a totally different location that they haven't touched on before in the comics. And it's like I said, it's really well written, and it's beautifully drawn by Tess Fowler. So definitely worth checking out.
Very
Sounds
nice.
good.
All right. Any special shout-outs or mentions this week?
No, don't think so.
No.
Nothing here.
All right. We'll go ahead and go to our regular shout-outs. Obviously want to thank Pop Goes Culture for allowing us to be part of their podcast network of really cool shows. We'll have a link in the show notes. Definitely encourage you to go check them out. We also want you to check out our fellow brother and sister podcasters that make up Potter and Family on Twitter. And the best way to do that is just to go to Twitter and do a search, #Potter and Family, and just scroll through, and whatever catches your attention, by all means, download that episode, and hopefully you have a blast. Thank you guys for your support as always. Also want to thank Manny and Martyr for supplying the music to our podcast. We'll have a link in the show notes for you to check out their music. Thank you guys as always. And finally, you, dear listener, thank you for downloading and listening to today's episode. We appreciate your support as always. We'd love to hear from you. Any kind of feedback, comment, question, suggestion, complaint, observation, what have you, by all means, contact us. And there's several ways you can do that. Our email address is email@thefellowshipofthegeeks.net, or you can go to the website and go to the About Us page, and there's a contact form that you can fill out there. As I mentioned earlier, we're on Facebook, the Fellowship of the Geeks, and we're obviously on Twitter, @FellowshipGeeks. Please follow us there. And if you're interested in wanting to attend our meet and gabs, as I mentioned, we do have a Facebook event already set up, so go check that out. If you like to follow our personal Twitter accounts, Mike can be found @MikeyGeek. Liz can be found @LN_geek. And I can be found @TomTCGeek. And for wherever you download or listen to our podcast, we would greatly appreciate it if you would take a couple moments to rate and review our show. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Just thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate you listening.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We do appreciate your support as always. And until next time, geek on, my friends.
We thank you for listening to the show. Comments, suggestions, and questions can be sent to email@thefellowshipofthegeeks.net. You can follow us on Facebook @The Fellowship of the Geeks and on Twitter @FellowshipGeeks. Until next time,